Now we're going to talk with Deepa Mehta, a filmmaker who explores the issue of domestic violence in her new film, Heaven on Earth.
Somebody said, what do you want from Heaven on Earth? And I thought, my God, what I would like is that perhaps our policy would change, and that every time an immigrant woman comes to Canada, you know, when you come to the officer and they check you and ask you, you know, all the pertinent questions, that they're given a card and saying, these are your rights. And you
so she's informed.
She's totally informed.
Right, and a lot of time these women are not informed of what their rights.
They have no
feel
clue.
like they have to just do whatever these men tell them to do.
And whatever the white society expects them to do. I mean, they come in here as a workforce, and that's what they use as a workforce. And there's nothing that is beyond that that makes people feel comfortable.
Why do men do this?
Frustration, power, and identity. Why do people bully? I mean, why, you know, people, whether you grew up in Canada or in India or in Timbuktu, you know, it doesn't matter. We've all known people who bully in schools. You know, so it's not about color, it's not about being macho, it's not about men who come from hot-headed climates, etc. Those are sort of stereotypical images.
And your film is cutting through that.
And I hope destroying all that for once. Yeah.
There's a scene in the film I was trying to refer to it before where she is in bed with her new husband, I guess, and he's about to make a move on her, and she says, because she doesn't know him, and I just felt this tension, and she says, "What are your hobbies?" And then he kind of just stops and says, "Get undressed." And
no, he says actually, and you might have forgotten it. He says cricket.
Oh yeah, he says cricket. He says his hobby.
So it isn't that, you know, it isn't that direct, and it's about wanting to get to know each other.
But there's still this tension of like the idea of being in an arranged marriage or a marriage where you don't really know each other is a world that most people in Western North America don't know, and this is an extra pressure that this culture feels.
But it's also true. I mean, that in this sort of mainstream culture, you have, you know, dates through computers, where you meet people.
How foreign is that?
And how foreign is that? That's totally foreign to me, living here right now. But that's an arranged marriage, except it's through a computer. And then you get married, and you know, and before you know it, he's hitting you, and it's got nothing to do with an arranged marriage. It's the spouse that you have, and his own frustrations and his own anger and power.
Deepa, this is a fascinating conversation. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
After the break, I talked to a marriage counselor about the top 3 reasons why couples break up. I'm joined in studio by Dave Phillips. He's a marriage and family therapist for the past 25 years. Dave, you have had thousands of couples in your office talking about...
Maybe a little less than thousands.
Well, you've had a lot of couples in your office.
Sure, a lot of people.
Tell me this. What are the top 3 reasons why couples break up?
Well, I mean, it's a good question. It's an interesting question. I think in terms of what people report is the event that led to the dissolution of their marriage. Oftentimes it is things like affairs or finances or incompatibility with in-laws or career issues, those sorts of things. However, the research gets underneath kind of what really are the issues that...
So what are they?
Like those are the stressors that kind of finally the straw that breaks the camel's back. There's really a few for me that are the most key ones. Number one is lack of building a friendship in the marriage. And this amazing how key this idea of friendship has emerged, you know, in the studies on marriage as being almost the glue, the cement that makes the fabric of a lifelong
partnership. Well, you think that of course they'd be friends. They're getting married.
No. It's not of course they would be friends. I've got a strong conviction that most of us get married with ideas that marriage isn't about friendship. Marriage isn't about partnership. Marriage is about being a soulmate, finding that person that's just going to kind of complete me, take care of my problems, be there when I need them.
You're saying that can wreck a relationship?
Not only can wreck it, you asked what the number one reason is? I think that's the number one reason. Because when our partners don't fill that bill, when they don't come through for us when we really need them, that's when we begin to see the real scary stuff.
Oh, there's something wrong with them.
It starts with criticism, and then it gets to contempt. And contempt is this idea that I believe there's something flawed with you, I'm better than you, there's something materially wrong with you. And when I cross that line into contempt, that seems across the board to be the issue.
What does contempt look like in marriage? Because that's a huge kind of concept.
It's interesting. Actually, what it looks like in physical terms is the rolling of the eyes. A person comes home and says, hey, I can't do this, or I want to do this, or I spent money on this, and you get that rolling of the eyes. That is physically the demonstrative way we can see contempt in the lab. But really what it looks like is beginning to just judge the other person, beginning to look down on them.
I would never do that.
Yeah, I would never do that. Make meanings out of things they're doing that are very harsh and very critical. These are the pieces that really lead to the dissolution and the end of marriage. This is why people begin to find, friendship and partnership and sex and passion in other relationships, because it begins to be bankrupt in the marriage.
Okay, so you're not saying it's just like, oh, I just had an affair, or I just did this.
Well, of course. I mean, those are sometimes the events that trigger the end of a marriage, because oftentimes people just say, I can't live with you any longer because you did that. But I suspect, and the research seems to back this up, that those become the catalytic events, the sort of reasons we find to kind of locate all our problems. But I really think it's based in the fact that we've not only not formed a quality friendship, partnership, lifelong in our marriage. We didn't even know that that's what we were supposed to do. Like you said, we thought it was automatic.
Right. So you talk about friendship, you talked about contempt. What's another thing that you would say, another reason why couples seem to be breaking up?
Well, I mean, maybe it's related, but I think it's really still widespread, and I'll just call it sexism. That we come to very strong biases and ideas about ourselves, either men towards women or women towards men. But primarily in the research, it really does seem to be the lack of men to accept influence from their wives seems to...
What do you mean by that, influence?
Well, they seem not able, many men seem not able to be influenced or to have their wives move them in certain directions. There seems to be a pride or an arrogance, or really what I'll call a sexism, that says, I am not going to be influenced. I'm not going to be persuaded. I'm not going to be somehow coerced by my wife. Wow. And that kind of sexism that says I will use my power as a male or my powerful position as the husband to get my way, that does seem to be...
I want to pick up this conversation more with Dave, marriage and family therapist, right after this. I'm joined again by Dave Phillips, a marriage and family therapist for 25 years, a long time. Dave, you just talked about sexism as a real huge issue. How does issues of religion or spirituality factor into marriages?
I mean, it's really huge. I believe you've had a filmmaker on, did her film Heaven on Earth, and about domestic violence. And one of the key issues we have to look at is how our faith spiritualities, how our heritages are they moving us towards sexism or away from sexism? As a Christian, I look at so much of what we have taught through, in the last century or so about the husband being the head of the home. And although maybe well-intentioned, what we're really saying is you have to be an island unto yourself. You're the man. You've got to be in charge. You've got to be the one with the power. And you've got to exercise that power in a really right-handed, strong-handed kind of way. And unintentionally, I believe, we have actually supported a sexism. We've actually supported the dissolution of marriages by saying this husband, this man needs to be separate from the rest of his family, needs to be this strong, silent, angry, kind of ruling entity within the family. And I see it in other faiths too, not just Christianity, Islam and Hinduism, unintentionally, I believe, seem to support this sexism, which
so how do you push against that then? How does a...
Boy, I think we have to be very careful in how we understand what God is saying, to people through the scriptures. Is he actually telling us to be, strong and powerful and put people down? Or is he asking us to be humble? Is he asking us to listen? Is he asking us to, kind of come in a one-down position? I believe it is. From the Christian perspective, when this idea of the husband being the head of the home really says you need to serve your home in the same way that Christ served the church and gave himself up for it. It's a very different perspective than one which has been taught. But since men have been the ones who have ruled the church, what's in their interest to do this? It seems like a conflict for them to take that position.
So the issue, obviously, of humility is present in almost every religion, and yet it's been absent in many of the way it's lived out in real life.
Especially as we've talked about marriage and the marriage relationship. If I say contempt is probably the single biggest reason why marriages dissolve, that humility and compassion and love will be those things that will engender a lifelong friendship.
Dave, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's, as always, it's so great chatting with you.
Thanks so much, Randall.
Many people are cynical these days about marriage because it seems to fail so often. The bringing together of two individuals often creates more tension than it does beauty. But then I meet a couple like Mike and Sonia, and I'm amazed at how beautiful it looks, because here's a couple who have decided to accept one another and not change each other even when their beliefs, their religious beliefs, are so strong? I think that's the answer. Accepting one another without the desire or the need to control or change the person. That's the key. We hide ourselves from one another because we fear that the other person might not accept me or love me if they truly knew who I was. I think about my own marriage, the last 17 years with my wife, Heather, and we have tried to accept one another even when the times are difficult. So take the risk of truly revealing yourself to another person and embrace the change that's bound to happen. It'll result in a far more interesting journey. Thanks for watching. I'm Randall Mark. That's my perspective.